When warriors drank wine from the skulls of their enemies and children disappeared into roaring flames, the ancient world was far darker than most history books dare to admit. Beyond the familiar tales of Rome and Athens lie civilizations whose names have faded from memory, yet whose brutality would eclipse anything recorded in the mainstream histories we learned in school. These were societies where human sacrifice was not an aberration, but a ritual, where heads were trophies, and where terror itself became a weapon of state policy. The Scythians, scalping enemies and drinking from skulls. Across the windswept steppes of Central Asia, from the shores of the Black Sea to the borders of China, a confederation of nomadic warriors dominated the ancient world for nearly 1,000 years. The Scythians emerged around the 8th century BCE as masters of mounted warfare, and their reputation for savagery spread terror from Persia to the edges of Europe. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, documented their customs with a mixture of fascination and horror that has echoed through the centuries. The Scythians turned the bodies of their enemies into trophies in ways that defy modern comprehension. When a Scythian warrior killed an enemy in battle, he would make a circular incision around the skull above the ears, then remove the skull from the scalp. Using the rib of an ox, he would work away all the tissue until only the skin remained. This scalp would then be worked between his hands until it became supple, after which the warrior would hang it from his horse's bridle like a handkerchief. The more scalps a warrior displayed, the greater his honor among his people. But the skull itself served an even more grotesque purpose. After removing the scalp, the warrior would remove everything below the eyebrows, empty out the interior, and cover the outside with leather. Wealthy Scythians would line the inside with gold, transforming their enemies' skulls into drinking cups. These skull cups were not hidden away, but proudly displayed when visitors of importance arrived. The owners would pass them around while boasting of the battles in which they had claimed each trophy. Archaeological evidence discovered in southern Siberia confirms these ancient accounts. 4 skulls unearthed from Scythian sites bear the distinctive horizontal incisions running ear to ear across the back, precisely matching Herodotus's descriptions of the scalping process. Once each year, the governor of each Scythian district would mix a great bowl of wine. All Scythians who had killed enemies in battle had the right to drink from this bowl, but those who had killed no one were forbidden to taste it and were forced to sit apart in disgrace. Warriors who had slain many enemies were given 2 cups instead of 1. In their hands, death became not just warfare but ceremony, not just violence but religious devotion to martial prowess. The Carthaginians, child sacrifice in the Tophet. On the coast of North Africa, where the ancient city of Carthage once commanded the Western Mediterranean, archaeologists uncovered something that would spark decades of controversy. Between 1920 and 1970, excavations revealed a sacred precinct known as the Tophet of Salammbô, containing over 20,000 urns filled with the cremated remains of infants and young children. The discovery forced scholars to confront a horrifying question that many had dismissed as Roman propaganda. Did the Carthaginians really sacrifice their own children? The word Tophet comes from Hebrew scripture, describing a place in Jerusalem where people passed children through fire as offerings to the gods. At Carthage, this practice appears to have been conducted on an industrial scale. The burial ground stretched across 64,000 square feet and contained 9 distinct layers, representing centuries of ritual activity. Each urn was buried beneath stone markers inscribed with symbols of the goddess Tanit and the god Baal-Hamon, the principal deities of Carthage. The inscriptions on these markers provide chilling evidence of what transpired. They speak of vows fulfilled and promises kept, suggesting that parents offered their children in exchange for divine favor. When famine threatened, when plague ravaged the city, when enemies gathered at the gates, the people of Carthage turned to their gods with the most precious gift they could offer. Children were placed in the outstretched bronze arms of a statue of Baal, where flames took them as drums pounded to mask the sounds. Scientific analysis of the remains revealed that most of these children died between birth and 3 months of age. Some were stillborn or died of natural causes, but a significant number showed no signs of illness or malnutrition. They were healthy infants selected for sacrifice, their brief lives extinguished in the flames of religious devotion. Classical sources recorded that during moments of extreme crisis, the wealthy families of Carthage would sacrifice their firstborn children. In 310 BCE, when a siege threatened the city, upper-class families reportedly offered their children by the hundreds. Despite attempts by some historians to dismiss these accounts as anti-Carthaginian propaganda, the archaeological evidence has become overwhelming. The combination of literary sources, inscriptions, and physical remains tells a consistent story. Carthage was a civilization capable of extraordinary achievements in trade, navigation, and military organization. Yet it was also a society where children disappeared into the flames of the Tophet, and parents believed this horror would secure the blessings of the gods. Illyrian pirate kings and their terror across the Adriatic. The eastern coast of the Adriatic Sea, with its countless natural harbors and hidden coves, provided the perfect base for pirates who would bring the ancient Mediterranean world to its knees. The Illyrians, a confederation of tribes inhabiting the Western Balkans, transformed piracy into a state-sponsored enterprise that challenged the growing power of Rome and brought trade across the Adriatic to a standstill. King Agron of the Ardeaei tribe, ruling in the 3rd century BCE, unified the Illyrian peoples and created what Polybius called the greatest naval power ever seen in those waters. His fleet consisted of swift vessels called lembi, small galleys that could hold 100 pirates, 50 to row and 50 to fight. These ships would dart from their concealed positions along the coast, overwhelm merchant vessels, and disappear before anyone could respond. The Illyrians became so bold that they attacked Greek cities on the mainland, using their naval superiority to raid and plunder at will. When Agron died in 231 BCE, his widow, Queen Tutor, assumed the regency for her young stepson and expanded the campaign of terror. She removed all restrictions on piracy and gave her fleets license to attack any ship they encountered. In one particularly cunning raid, Illyrian pirates posed as merchants in a Greek city, selling their goods at apparent losses to attract crowds of eager buyers. When the marketplace was full of people absorbed in bargaining, the pirates drew their weapons and captured hundreds of civilians, dragging them back to their ships to be sold as slaves. The turning point came when Tutor's pirates made a fatal miscalculation. They began attacking Italian merchant ships, prompting complaints to flood into the Roman Senate. Rome dispatched 2 envoys to Queen Tutor with a message: "Control your pirates or face the consequences." Tutor responded with contempt. She told the Romans that piracy was an ancient custom of the Illyrian kings, and that she could not interfere with the right of private citizens to seek their fortune on the sea. When one of the Roman envoys spoke disrespectfully to her, she had him murdered on his voyage home. Rome's response was swift and overwhelming. In 229 BCE, Roman forces crossed the Adriatic for the first time, beginning the First Illyrian War. Within 2 years, Rome had shattered the Illyrian kingdom, forced Teuta to surrender, and established its first foothold on the eastern Adriatic coast. The era of the Illyrian pirate kings had ended, but their reputation for terror on the high seas remained legendary. The Celts, headhunting tribes, and Wicker Man burnings. Across the forests and highlands of ancient Europe, from the British Isles to the plains of Anatolia, Celtic tribes practiced rituals that shocked even the battle-hardened Romans. The Celts were skilled metalworkers, artists of extraordinary talent, and fierce warriors. But they were also a people for whom the severed head held profound spiritual significance. The human head was believed to house the soul, and taking an enemy's head was not simply a martial trophy, but a religious act. Julius Caesar, campaigning in Gaul in the 1st century BCE, recorded practices that horrified Roman sensibilities. Celtic warriors would behead their enemies in battle and display the heads from their horses' bridles, carrying them home as proof of their valor. The heads of particularly important enemies would be preserved in cedar oil and displayed prominently in Celtic homes. Archaeological excavations have confirmed these accounts. At Gournay-sur-Arende in France, archaeologists found a sanctuary containing hundreds of weapons and numerous human skulls, arranged in ritual patterns. The skulls from London's River Walbrook and the dozens of headless corpses found at other Celtic sites provide tangible evidence of this widespread practice. But headhunting was not the only ritual that marked Celtic society as terrifying to outsiders. Both Caesar and the Greek geographer Strabo described a form of mass human sacrifice that would become infamous: the Wicker Man. According to their accounts, Celtic druids would construct enormous human-shaped figures from wicker and wood, fill them with living prisoners and animals, and set the entire structure ablaze. Caesar wrote that the Celts believed a human life must be given for a human life to appease the gods. During times of disease or before battles, druids would oversee these sacrifices. Criminals were preferred victims, but when the supply of criminals ran out, innocent people would be sacrificed instead. Strabo added details that made the practice even more horrifying, describing how cattle, wild animals, and humans would all be thrown into the Colossus before it was set on fire. The question of whether the Wicker Man actually existed remains debated among historians. Archaeological evidence for such large-scale burnings is lacking, and some scholars argue that Caesar exaggerated Celtic practices to justify Roman conquest. However, bog bodies discovered across Celtic territories provide undeniable evidence of human sacrifice. The Lindo man, found preserved in a bog in England, had been strangled, struck on the head, and had his throat opened in rapid succession before being placed in the bog. This threefold death pattern matches descriptions found in medieval Irish texts, suggesting a ritual killing rather than a simple execution. The Kingdom of Dahomey, mass human sacrifices for royal funerals. In the forests of West Africa, where the Kingdom of Dahomey ruled from approximately 1600 until the early 20th century, death was not an end, but a transition, and kings did not travel to the afterlife alone. The annual customs of Dahomey known as Xwetanu in the Fon language, were ceremonies that combined gift-giving, military parades, and religious rituals that culminated in mass human sacrifice on a scale that shocked even hardened European observers. The customs served multiple purposes in Dahomean society. They were occasions for the king to receive tribute from his subjects, to display the wealth and power of the kingdom, and to communicate with the ancestors through bloodshed. But when a king died, the ceremonies reached their most horrifying scale. The successor was not considered fully legitimate until he had performed the grand custom, a funeral ceremony that could last for months and consume thousands of lives. King Agaja, who conquered the neighboring kingdoms of Alada and Wida in the 1720s, formalized these customs into state policy. An English trader in 1727 reported witnessing the sacrifice of 400 war captives in a single ceremony, though some accounts place the number at 4,000. When King Kpengla died in 1789, his funeral rites stretched across 2 years and claimed approximately 1,500 lives. The sacrifices served a dual purpose in Dahomean religious belief. The victims were sent as messengers to the spirit world, carrying news of the kingdom's prosperity to the ancestors. More importantly, they were meant to serve the dead king in the afterlife. High-ranking officials, wives, guards, and trusted advisors of the deceased king would volunteer to die with their master, believing it was an honor to continue serving him beyond death. For these individuals, to refuse the honor of dying with the king would mean disgrace and loss of status under his successor. The sacrificial victims were primarily criminals awaiting execution, war captives from Dahome's constant military campaigns, and those who had volunteered for religious reasons. The method was almost always beheading, and the ceremony was conducted with elaborate ritual. The king himself would sometimes dispatch the first victims, demonstrating his authority over life and death. The ritual fluid would be collected and sprinkled on the graves of the ancestors, and the skulls would be used to adorn the palace walls. European visitors to Dahomey left accounts of these customs that ranged from clinical description to expressions of horror. Some attempted to dissuade the kings from continuing the practice, but the response was always the same. These were ancient traditions essential to maintaining the favor of the ancestors. When King Adandozan attempted to reduce the scale of the sacrifices in the early 19th century, he was overthrown, in part because his subjects believed he was failing to properly honor the dead kings. Scientific analysis has recently confirmed the most shocking claims about Dahomey. Researchers studying the blood-red walls of King Gezo's palace funerary huts used advanced protein analysis to prove that the mortar contained human ritual fluid mixed with animal matter and sacred water. Local tradition claimed that 41 sacrificial victims provided the blood for these structures, and the scientific evidence supports this claim. The blood was not simply a component of the mortar, but part of a voodoo consecration ceremony meant to imbue the buildings with spiritual power and create a barrier between the human world and the spirit realm. The civilizations we have explored today challenge our understanding of the ancient world. They remind us that human culture has taken forms both magnificent and monstrous, that the capacity for extraordinary achievement and unspeakable cruelty often coexisted within the same society. The Scythians who drank from skulls were also master horsemen who developed military tactics that would influence warfare for millennia. The Carthaginians who burned children in the Tophet were also the greatest maritime traders of their age. The Illyrian pirates who terrorized the Adriatic were also skilled shipbuilders who who controlled vital trade routes. The Celts, who hunted heads, were also artists whose metalwork remains unsurpassed. And the kings of Dahomey, who presided over mass sacrifice, were also shrewd political leaders who built one of West Africa's most powerful states. The ancient world was a place where brilliance and barbarity walked hand in hand, and the echoes of their footsteps still resonate in the archaeological sites and written records they left behind.